She knew the moment her heart betrayed her. It happened quietly, dangerously, in a way she never expected. The first line of her life's biggest mistake was written the moment she whispered to herself, "I think I'm falling for the man I'm not supposed to love, my brother's fiancé." She never wanted this. She never asked for it. But the heart never listened, not even when it should have screamed stop. She grew up in a small town where secrets traveled faster than the wind. Her brother was the golden boy, steady, dependable, the kind who made everyone feel safe. And when he introduced her brother's fiancé to the family, she tried to smile, tried to be welcoming, tried to be everything a sister should be. But the moment she looked at the woman standing beside him, something inside her shifted. Her brother's fiancé had soft eyes, a quiet laugh, and a kindness that felt like sunlight. She didn't know why it pulled her in, only that it did. The situation was simple on the surface. They were family now. They were supposed to grow close, share laughs at family dinners, and become an easy part of each other's lives, like furniture you never notice but always appreciate. On paper, it should have been effortless. But the heart is rarely simple, and sometimes the things we're meant to embrace quietly twist into something entirely unexpected. She had told herself she would be polite, warm, welcoming even. That was all she needed to do. Just be the sister who smiled and nodded, who laughed when appropriate, and who kept the right distance. But the moment her brother asked her to keep her brother's fiancé company while he worked late, everything became complicated in a way she hadn't anticipated. It was a mild summer evening, the kind where the sun seemed to hesitate before slipping behind the horizon, leaving golden light pooling across the small porch. The air was warm, heavy with the smell of freshly cut grass and the faint tang of evening flowers. The crickets had begun their nightly symphony, a soft, rhythmic hum that filled the space between words. She remembered thinking, as she walked onto that porch, that it should have been peaceful, even pleasant. Just a casual evening, sitting outside, enjoying a quiet conversation, and sharing a glass of iced tea. That was all. Nothing more. But then her brother's fiancé was there, and she felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere the second she stepped out. The woman moved with a quiet grace, unhurried, like someone who belonged to the golden light itself. She was brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, delicate fingers catching the last glow of the sun. And in that instant, something happened deep inside Emily, a sudden tug at her chest she wasn't prepared to name. Her heartbeat stuttered once, sharply, like a drum skipping a beat, and she caught herself inhaling too quickly, suddenly aware of the warmth in the summer air mingling with the heat rising from her own skin. It terrified her how much she noticed. Every detail seemed to etch itself into her memory with perfect clarity. The subtle perfume that trailed behind the fiancé's movements, soft but intoxicating, a scent that made her stomach flutter and her mind scramble for control. The way her voice carried softly across the porch, words casual and light, but somehow imbued with a gentleness that made Emily lean in, even when she tried to keep her distance. Every nervous tap of her fingers against the railing, a rhythm almost imperceptible, was like a signal she couldn't ignore. She hated that she was memorizing the cadence of those tiny, intimate movements, the almost invisible habits that told her more than words ever could. Emily tried to look away, tried to focus on the glass in her hand, the fading sunlight, the faint pattern of shadows across the porch floorboards. She told herself it was harmless to notice, just polite attentiveness. But her chest betrayed her, tightening with every small gesture, every laugh that made her heart stumble in unexpected ways. The way the fiancé's shoulders moved when she leaned forward slightly, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled, the soft brush of her fingers against her own knee when she adjusted her position, every tiny motion seemed amplified, magnified, impossible to ignore. And yet, she couldn't look away. She tried to distract herself, scanning the yard, the street, the distant line of trees swaying in the evening breeze. But the fiancé's presence anchored her, pulled her in like gravity. She had no choice but to obey. Emily felt a strange mixture of emotions coursing through her: admiration, curiosity, longing, and something that frightened her most of all: desire. Not the desire of touch, not that kind of forbidden spark she couldn't name, but a desire to know her, to exist near her, to be part of this quiet moment even when it wasn't hers to claim. The sound of the crickets continued, steady and almost hypnotic, and she noticed how her own breathing had become irregular, shallow almost, like she was tiptoeing along an invisible edge she couldn't see. She hated the vulnerability, the sudden exposure of herself that came with every glance she stole. She hated the way her thoughts wandered, imagining conversations, imagining her brother's fiancé leaning closer, imagining moments that could never happen. And yet, she couldn't stop. She hated, and yet, in a way she refused to admit, she wanted to. The light shifted as the sun finally dipped below the horizon, leaving a wash of soft orange and pink fading into deeper blues. The porch now felt intimate in a way Emily wasn't prepared for, small, almost cocoon-like, as if the world beyond didn't exist and it was only the two of them. The warmth of the air, the gentle sounds of night stirring around them, the subtle closeness of their bodies as they sat side by side, it was overwhelming. And she hated that it was overwhelming. She hated that something so simple, a casual evening on the porch, had become a battlefield for her heart, a quiet storm she couldn't escape. Every time her brother's fiancée laughed, her voice soft and melodic, her chest tightened again. Every time she reached for the glass, fingers brushing Emily's for a moment too long, her mind spun in loops of guilt and fascination. She hated how much she wanted to notice, how much she couldn't stop noticing. And yet she couldn't tear her eyes away, couldn't stop the pulse of longing that seemed to echo in every beat of her heart. By the time the sky had deepened into twilight, she realized with a jolt that nothing about this evening had been simple, nothing about her feelings was manageable, and nothing about the fiancé's presence had been ordinary. And in that moment, as the last glow of the sun disappeared and the first fireflies appeared, she understood the truth she had been resisting, that her heart had already chosen, that it had already betrayed her, and that she had no power to make it stop. And she hated that truth. That was the complication, wanting someone she could never have. Every glance across the room felt like a theft, as if she were stealing fragments of a life that was never meant for her. Every smile that curved the fiancé's lips felt like a private sin, a quiet rebellion against the rules her heart had promised to follow. She tried to convince herself it was nothing, mere admiration, harmless fascination, the way one might notice the sun hitting someone's hair just so. But the truth refused to stay buried. Admiration didn't make her stomach twist when their hands brushed accidentally while reaching for the same cup in the kitchen. It wasn't the touch itself, no one would have noticed, but the electricity that jolted through her in that instant, the rapid, uneven beat of her pulse that made her fingers tremble even after she withdrew them, told her otherwise. Admiration didn't make her voice catch when she asked a casual question, only to hear her own heartbeat pound in response to the warmth of her answer. It didn't make her palms sweat when she lingered near her, pretending to busy herself with small tasks, yet secretly counting the moments she could remain in the fiancé's presence without arousing suspicion. It didn't make her stomach sink into a pit of despair when she overheard whispered wedding plans, the excitement in the fiancé's voice a cruel echo of everything she couldn't claim. She found herself imagining herself in those conversations, imagining herself smiling beside her, imagining her name being spoken with anticipation and love. And the realization that she could never be there, it made her chest ache with a pressure that no words could release. Admiration didn't make her feel sick the first time she saw her brother kiss the woman she tried so desperately not to love. The world seemed to tilt, colors dulling, sounds muffled, as if every sense was focused on the image of them together. Her brother's hand rested lightly on the fiancé's waist, her face tilted up with a smile meant only for him, and she felt a wave of nausea and longing wash over her in equal measure. She wanted to look away, wanted to escape, but she couldn't. She was trapped, an unwilling witness to a life she yearned to touch but was forbidden from entering. It wasn't just jealousy, it was betrayal. Betrayal of herself, of her own boundaries, of every principle she had promised to uphold. Every interaction that followed was a battlefield of restraint. She lingered too long when passing by her in the hallway, pretending to notice something mundane on the counter. She found herself lingering in the kitchen when she knew her brother's fiancé would come for coffee, timing her steps so they would collide accidentally, just to feel the brush of hands again, to breathe the same air, to hear the subtle inflections in her voice up close. Each stolen moment felt like fire against her ribs, beautiful and forbidden, and it made her wonder if anyone had ever felt this dangerous pull before. Her mind became a maze of what-ifs and should-nots. What if she leaned closer when she asked a question, and their eyes met too long? What if she laughed at a joke and smiled with a sincerity her heart didn't deserve? What if her admiration was mistaken for something more, or worse, revealed to someone who would never forgive her? Every small interaction carried weight she had never imagined. A touch on the arm, a shared glance over the rim of a coffee cup, the faint brushing of shoulders as they both reached for the same utensil, all of it became a dance of forbidden desire, a rhythm she wasn't allowed to join but couldn't resist. Even the simplest, most innocent moments turned into internal war zones. She hated herself for noticing how the fiancé's laughter made her stomach flutter, how the tilt of her head made her breath catch, how the fiancé's presence in the same room made the air electric, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Every heartbeat became a countdown she couldn't control, every glance a temptation she couldn't resist, every smile a guilty pleasure she couldn't confess. And yet, she continued to watch, continued to linger, continued to feel a longing so intense it made her knees weak and her thoughts spiral. She hated the admiration that had turned into obsession, the fascination that had become something almost dangerous. She hated the way it made her feel alive and empty at the same time, alive in the stolen seconds beside her, empty in the knowledge that nothing could ever be hers. And still, she couldn't step away. Each moment, each glance, each accidental touch was a thread weaving her into a tapestry of forbidden longing, a story she didn't want to be part of but couldn't escape. The complication was simple in theory but brutal in practice, wanting someone she could never, ever have, and feeling every impossible desire as if it were her only truth. Feelings deepened in quiet, dangerous ways. Her brother's fiancé noticed her sadness one afternoon in the backyard and sat beside her on the grass, close enough for their shoulders to brush. She said she always felt strangely comfortable around her, like she could trust her with anything. Emily smiled even though her heart cracked a little. She wanted to say, "You shouldn't trust me. Not with this." But instead, she nodded, pretending she was fine. The twist came in the most unexpected moment, the kind of moment that made her feel as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet and the world had suddenly tilted sideways. Her brother, in his usual absent-minded way, had left his phone carelessly on the edge of the kitchen table. She had barely registered it at first, a mundane oversight, the kind of thing that happened all the time. But then the screen lit up, a soft glow cutting through the dim kitchen, and a message preview blinked insistently at her. Something made her glance at it, curiosity mixed with an unspoken sense of foreboding, and the words on the screen stopped her heart mid-beat. It wasn't from her brother's fiancé. It wasn't an innocuous message about groceries, work, or the mundane details of life. It was from someone else. Someone called him love. Someone asking, with a casual yet unsettling familiarity, if he'd broken things off yet. The words hung in the air, bright and damning, almost mocking her. Her stomach dropped in a freefall she hadn't felt since childhood, the kind of sinking dread that makes your hands go clammy and your mouth dry. She froze, unable to look away, unable to breathe, unable to move. Her entire body seemed to lock in place as the realization crashed over her in sharp, jagged pieces. He wasn't faithful. The man everyone had trusted, her brother, the reliable, golden-hearted man who smiled easily and held his promises like sacred objects, was living a lie. A lie she had never imagined, a betrayal she wasn't prepared to witness. Her mind raced faster than her heart. The images she had of family dinners, of shared laughter, of the fiancé's bright smile, suddenly felt fragile, like glass teetering on the edge of the counter. Everything seemed to carry a new weight. She wanted to step back, to turn away, to pretend she hadn't seen anything, but she couldn't. She was caught in a web she didn't want to enter, a story that had turned dark without warning. And then the floodgates opened. Her own feelings, the forbidden longing, the stolen glances, the quiet ache she carried for someone she could never claim, became tangled with this new, explosive truth. Suddenly, her brother's fiancé wasn't just the object of impossible desire, she was someone who might be hurt, deceived, betrayed in ways she had only imagined in whispered fears. Should she tell her? Should she step in, break the silence, protect her from heartbreak she hadn't caused but couldn't ignore? Every scenario made her chest tighten, every thought sparked a fire of panic and guilt. But there was another part of her that screamed to run, to escape, to vanish before she became complicit in this mess. Because being there, seeing this, feeling the forbidden attraction to her brother's fiancé while knowing her brother's betrayal, it was a volatile mix she wasn't sure she could handle. She imagined leaving, disappearing down the quiet streets of the town they all knew so well, the summer air heavy and suffocating around her as if even the world knew she was carrying a secret too dangerous to hold. Every possible choice tormented her. If she told the fiancé, she would be stepping into a storm, exposing truths that could shatter lives, and she would be forced to confront the line she had already crossed in her heart. If she stayed silent, she would live with the weight of knowing, watching the woman she loved and the man she resented continue a fragile illusion that could implode at any second. And if she ran, if she left everything behind, she would be abandoning not only her brother's fiancé but also herself, leaving her desires and her conscience tangled in regret that would never untangle. Her hands shook as she picked up the phone, the device suddenly heavier than anything she had held before. Her chest burned, her head spun, and for a moment, the crickets outside, the soft hum of evening, even the comforting familiarity of the house became unbearable. The forbidden feelings she carried, the longing she had tried to bury, the jealousy she had tried to ignore, the small, secret smiles that had felt like sins, were no longer just about desire. They were wrapped in responsibility, in danger, in moral chaos that had landed squarely on her shoulders. She felt trapped between worlds, the world she had been living in, where admiration was safe, and smiles could be stolen without consequence, and the world she had been thrust into, where deception and desire collided in ways she had never anticipated. And as the fiancé's laughter echoed from another room, innocent and unaware, it cut through her like a blade. She wanted to warn her. She wanted to protect her. She wanted to flee. And most of all, she wanted to reconcile the impossible, her forbidden longing and her loyalty, her heart and her conscience, in a way that didn't destroy everything in its path. The phone screen glowed in her hands, the message still there, waiting, a tiny, damning beacon of truth. She realized then that nothing would ever be simple again. Every glance, every touch, every stolen smile she had shared with her brother's fiancé had just gained weight, meaning she hadn't asked for but could no longer ignore. Her chest tightened, her breath caught, and she whispered to herself, almost as if the walls could hear, "What do I do now?" And for the first time, she understood that desire, love, and truth were a dangerous mix, and that she would have to navigate them carefully, or risk losing everything she ever cared about. The breakdown happened quietly, in the stillness of the house, yet it felt like the world itself had fractured. She had retreated to the hallway, pressing her back against the cool wall, trying to make herself disappear, trying to hold together the storm inside her chest. Tears had begun to slip unbidden, tracing warm lines down her cheeks, and for the first time, she couldn't hold herself together. The weight of everything, the longing she'd tried to deny, the jealousy she couldn't escape, the forbidden desire she had buried, collapsed all at once. She was shaking, silent but shattered, a fragile thing in a house that suddenly felt too large and too empty. And then her brother's fiancé appeared, footsteps soft but insistent on the hardwood floors, her voice trembling, edged with worry. "What's wrong?" she asked, leaning in closer, eyes wide and luminous in the dim hallway light, hands hovering just above Emily's shoulders, as if waiting for permission to enter her world. There was no judgment, no accusation, only concern, only the kind of openness that made Emily's chest tighten further, a mixture of relief and guilt she couldn't untangle. She broke then. Not with a confession of love, no, that was a line she still couldn't cross, but with something just as raw, just as unbearable, guilt, frustration, fear, a crushing mix of emotions that had been bottled up far too long. Her words tumbled out, halting, uneven, raw. She said she'd seen something she couldn't ignore, something that had rattled her in a way she couldn't explain, something that made her feel responsible in a way that terrified her. Her voice cracked under the weight of it, trembling so violently she thought she might disappear into the floor. And when the truth spilled out, the glimpses she had caught, the messages she had read, the realization that her brother was not who she had believed, the fiancé's world seemed to stop in a heartbeat. Not because of the betrayal, not because her trust had been broken, but because of Emily herself. Because in that vulnerable hallway, trembling, confessing what she couldn't keep in, she had become the person her brother's fiancé had turned to first. Her brother's fiancé leaned into his arms, shaking, letting herself collapse into a moment of unexpected intimacy. His hands rested lightly against Emily's shoulders, then slipped down to hold her, grounding them both. Why does it hurt less when I'm with you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible, carrying on a tremor of emotion that neither of them could ignore. Emily's chest tightened, her own tears falling freely, mingling with the warmth of the other's skin, a closeness that should have been forbidden, that should have shattered her completely. And yet it didn't destroy them, it felt like a strange, fragile kind of salvation. That moment ruined everything she thought she knew about boundaries, about loyalty, about the rules she had tried to live by. Every line she had drawn in the sand, every thought she had tried to suppress about longing and desire, every attempt to be safe had dissolved into this quiet, trembling, honest moment. And yet, at the same time, it healed something she hadn't realized was broken. It healed the weight of pretending, the exhaustion of hiding, the unbearable tension of carrying something so dangerous alone. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel without shame, to hold another without fear, to witness someone else's pain and know she could be the place where it softened, even just a little. Time seemed suspended in that hallway. The shadows of the house stretched long and thin across the floorboards, the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of summer insects outside the windows filling the gaps in the silence. Their bodies were close, hearts racing in unison, breaths mingling, and in that fragile proximity, Emily felt a sense of clarity she hadn't known she needed. It wasn't about the betrayal, or the lies, or even the forbidden feelings anymore. It was about truth, about presence, about the human connection that could survive pain and confusion, even in the most unexpected circumstances. And as her brother's fiancé clung to her, whispering the question again, Emily realized something vital: love didn't always follow rules. Sometimes it arrived in cracks, in moments of weakness, in the quiet spaces where honesty meant need. Sometimes it hurt, sometimes it destroyed, but sometimes it healed in ways that nothing else could. That night, in that hallway, they didn't solve everything. They didn't untangle the chaos or erase the past. But they existed together in the truth of the moment, and that, fragile, trembling, imperfect, was enough to begin. That moment ruined everything and healed something at the same time, leaving them suspended between despair and hope, fear and possibility, longing and the faintest taste of something like freedom. Her brother walked in on them, unexpectedly, abruptly, as if the universe had decided that no secret could remain hidden. The sight that met his eyes was nothing short of explosive. Her brother's fiancée, trembling and shaken, pressed against Emily's arms, both of them weeping in a tangled mixture of fear, relief, and sorrow. Every instinct screamed at him to act, to protect, to demand answers, but in that split second, he didn't understand. He didn't see the truth behind the closeness, the context of shared grief, the protection that had nothing to do with desire. His voice cut through the quiet like a blade. Sharp, accusing, full of raw emotion, he didn't even try to temper. "I should have known," he spat, eyes dark with fury and hurt. "You always wanted what wasn't yours." Each word struck her chest like shards of ice, slicing through the fragile remnants of composure she had clung to. Pain radiated outward, a cold, bitter ache that left her shaking, breath catching in her throat. Shame pressed down on her in waves, suffocating, inescapable. She didn't defend herself. She couldn't. How could she explain the tangle of love, fear, and desperation that had brought them together in that moment without sounding like the villain she now appeared to be? How could she make him understand that she hadn't stolen anything, that she had only been a safe place, a witness to someone else's pain, a shield against heartbreak that wasn't hers to prevent? The words lodged in her throat, heavy and unyielding, and she let the accusation wash over her instead, feeling the weight of judgment, love, and fear all coiled together into a tight, suffocating knot in her chest. The days that followed were quiet and heavy in ways she hadn't anticipated. The house felt impossibly large, every corner echoing with memory, every hallway haunted by what had happened. Her brother's fiancé moved out, leaving only traces of herself in the scent of the curtains, the faint warmth she had left behind on the furniture, and the empty space where laughter once lived. The wedding that had once seemed inevitable, joyful, and bright was quietly called off. Nothing was announced, no dramatic confrontation, just the slow, relentless unraveling of what could have been. Emily kept her distance, retreating inward as if to shield herself from the fallout she believed she had caused. Every attempt to function normally, to laugh, to speak, felt like a lie. Her own emotions were a storm, unpredictable and raw, guilt swirling with longing, regret tangled with memory, and a quiet, aching grief for something she could never reclaim. She watched from afar as her brother and fiancé navigated their own shattered paths, never daring to interfere, never daring to reach out, convinced that her presence would only make the fractures deeper. She tried to grow, slowly, painfully, rebuilding herself from the shards left behind. She tried to reclaim the parts of herself that had been lost in longing, shame, and forbidden desire. She tried to forgive herself for feeling what she had felt, for noticing what she should have ignored, for loving in ways she had been told were impossible. Every mirror, every reflection, every quiet moment alone became a battlefield, a place to measure progress, to weigh guilt against the fragile spark of self-respect she clung to. And yet, through it all, she told herself the same thing over and over, a mantra she clung to in silence: love wasn't meant for her, not this kind. Not the kind that burned quietly in the spaces between what was right and what was forbidden. Not the kind that had entwined her heart with someone she could never claim, that had shattered her, exposed her, left her trembling on the floor of a quiet hallway in the dark of night. Love, she told herself, was a luxury she hadn't earned, a flame she had stumbled too close to, and one that had scorched her for her audacity to feel. The house felt hollow, the nights long, and her own heartbeat loud in her ears, a relentless reminder of the desire she had carried and the chaos it had wrought. Every sound, the creak of floorboards, the faint rustle of the wind outside, the distant laughter of neighbors, felt magnified, a chorus of solitude that reminded her she was alone with her emotions, alone with the consequences of the heart she could no longer trust. And yet, even as she tried to convince herself that this was the end of her story, that love had passed her by, she felt a small, persistent ache that refused to go away. A quiet, stubborn pulse that whispered of what might have been, of the closeness she had experienced, of the raw truth she had glimpsed in someone else's arms. It was a pain she couldn't fully name, a longing that refused to be dismissed, a lesson she hadn't yet learned, that love, even forbidden, even devastating, leaves traces that time cannot erase. She walked through the empty rooms with careful steps, trying to fill her days with tasks, with errands, with ordinary life, but every glance at the hallway where it had happened, every shadow that stretched like a memory, reminded her that nothing could simply be forgotten. The world had changed, irrevocably, and so had she. Every attempt to be the person she thought she should be, composed, responsible, untouchable, clashed with the raw, human truth of the love she had carried, and the heartbreak she had survived. And so she continued, quietly, painfully, alone yet not entirely alone, learning how to live with the echo of what had been, the weight of what she had felt, and the stubborn knowledge that even in the absence of happiness, even in the aftermath of ruin, she was still capable of feeling, still capable of longing, still capable of love, even if it wasn't hers to claim. But healing had its own timing. Weeks later, on a cool evening with faint city lights flickering against the sky, her brother's fiancée appeared on her doorstep. She looked tired but clear, fragile but certain. She said she needed to say what she couldn't say before. That she knew something was there between them long before the truth came out. That she felt it in the porch lights, in the quiet dinners, in the moments that never needed words. She said she wasn't ready for love, not yet, not fully, but she was ready for honesty. Emily realized then that sometimes forbidden love wasn't about taking what wasn't yours. Sometimes it was about recognizing the person who made you braver, softer, more honest. Someone who saw you, really saw you. They didn't rush into anything. They didn't pretend the world would understand. Instead, they walked slowly, choosing healing over chaos, truth over guilt, and possibility over fear. And in that quiet decision, Emily finally understood, the heart listens after all, just not to rules, or timing, or expectations. It listens to what makes it come alive. The final moment was quiet, almost painfully simple, yet it carried the weight of everything they had endured. The sun had dipped just below the horizon, leaving the sky painted in muted shades of lavender and gold, the kind of fading evening light that made the world feel both fragile and infinite at the same time. Her brother's fiancé reached for her hand, slow and deliberate, fingers trembling but holding firm. There was no hesitation, no question, only the quiet courage of someone willing to step into the truth, no matter how uncertain the path ahead. She whispered softly, her voice low and intimate, almost blending with the gentle rustle of summer leaves outside the window. "Let's start with honesty. And see where it leads." The words hung between them, heavy and fragile, like a fragile bridge connecting two hearts that had been lost and broken in equal measure. And in that moment, Emily felt something shift inside her chest, a release, a surrender, but not to fear. Not to longing or shame or guilt. For the first time in what felt like forever, it didn't feel forbidden. It didn't feel like a secret she had to hide, a desire she had to bury, a moment she had to run from. It felt real. It felt earned. It felt like the beginning of something neither of them could have imagined in the quiet, heavy shadows of the past, but something they were finally brave enough to choose for themselves. She looked into the fiancé's eyes, searching for the faintest hint of doubt, a trace of hesitation, and found only warmth, understanding, and a quiet promise that they would face the days ahead together, whatever they might bring. The air between them felt alive, pulsing softly with possibility, with hope, with a fragile kind of joy that had been earned through heartbreak, through mistakes, through moments of unbearable longing and devastating truth. And in that moment, the world felt a little smaller, somehow, as if all the chaos, all the missteps, and all the nights spent wondering what had led them here. To be honest, to have courage. To the choice to begin again, fully, openly, without apology. It was a choice that felt like freedom, and they were ready to take it together. And as the night crept in, stars began to dot the sky. It made her wonder, what would you do if you were in a moment like this? Would you follow the heart, even when it meant risking everything? Or would you turn away, convinced that some desires were too dangerous to pursue? Stories like this remind us that love is rarely simple, that hearts are complicated, and that bravery sometimes looks like leaning into truth even when the path ahead is uncertain. If moments like these move you, make you ache, or make you hope, there's more waiting for you every single day, stories that capture the kind of love you can feel, the kind you can't forget, and the choices that leave hearts forever changed. So stay close. Don't miss a single story. Like, comment, and share your thoughts, because there's always another heartbeat, another secret, another truth ready to be told, and you won't want to miss the next one.